Welcome, Nathan Shedroff.
Good morning, how are you? I'm here to talk today about the value design brings to business, which, how many designers in the room? I can see most. Yeah, right on. Engineers, other kinds of developers, coders, right on. Non-designer, non-engineer, other business people. So ops, finance, marketing. Great, okay. I'm gonna apologize right off the bat because I will probably make some disparaging comments about business because I think business is not done, I think it's done in kind of a boneheaded way these days, and always has been for that matter. And I will admit I have an MBA, so that sort of gives me license to make fun of other MBAs. I think the dynamic between business and design is rapidly changing, which is a good thing, but sorely needs to change. And some of that is our responsibility as designers and other kinds of developers. And there's a lot of responsibility on the business side to re-examine a lot of assumptions, sometimes dogma, about what business is or how business works well. Just a little bit about me really quickly. I'm a designer at heart. I actually have a car design degree from way back. Never went into the industry, partly because it was so siloed and fragmented that, you know, well, if you look at American cars in the 70s and 80s and even 90s, you can tell how it wasn't really working very well. You know, the exterior team wouldn't talk to the interior team because they're not very cool. That's why they're on the interior team. There was no way to make holistic experiences. This happened a little bit better in Europe, but in the US, it was just not a great industry if you really wanted to make quality experiences. So instead, I went into information design, which way back then, I have a fair amount of gray hair, was all in print. Computers were just barely coming out. And so I've worked on a lot of sort of catalogs and directories and heavy information products, et cetera. And what that did for me is it led me right into the interaction design industry as it was forming in the first place. So I've worked on really weird devices that never have existed since. I've worked on a lot of CD-ROMs and websites. I really grew up in this industry. And then along the way, I've written a bunch of books, mostly on design, increasingly on business. The material I'm talking about this morning is from the new book that Lou Rosenfeld is going to be publishing, I and my co-author. And then, of course, like many of you along the way, I've consulted for a lot of companies, big and small, on design, on strategy, even on their business models. And then I've even started a couple companies myself here and there, some successful, some not as successful. But what I've been doing for the last 9 years now is exploring this area of business and design by creating a new MBA program. And it's known as the Design MBA, which a lot of people interpret as, oh, an MBA for designers so that they can speak businessese. But really what we've tried to build is an MBA program, a business program for the 21st century. Because if you've been through a business program, especially a traditional one at a traditional school, you might be horrified to learn what business people are told, especially in the realm of economics, a little bit in terms of operations and leadership. Sustainability is an option at best at most schools, where it's even that. So we decided that business needed to be done differently in the 21st century, and one of the ways that we could do that is to create a new program whole cloth. So we had a blank sheet of paper. It was one of the best design projects I've ever had, and we do everything a little bit differently from a few different lenses: the design thinking and design-based strategy lens, the sustainability and systems thinking lens, and then sort of new values and understandings of business. And so the last 9 years, I really looked deeply at how business could work better, how to teach that, how to teach it in a designerly way, and what's come out of that are, for me at least, a lot of new understandings of what designers' value can be in changing business, and then also what businesses' value can be in helping designers increase their impact and scope and understanding. So that's what I'll be talking about, and that's where I'm coming from. The first thing we should really talk about, and really what this whole talk is value. And I don't mean value in the sense of, you know, get 14 for the price of 16. The entire idea of value in business needs to be rethought and redefined. In most of us, we think of value in terms of purely financial terms. Not surprising. That's how most of us encounter value. In the business world, business people are really taught about price and performance, price and features. So there's an acknowledgement and a comfort around functional value. So we have functional value, we have financial value. That's sort of where business stops. And most developers, especially designers, but even engineers and coders and other kinds of developers, we know that there's more to the impact of what we create than just the features and how much it costs, when it costs something at all. And the reality is that business people kind of know it too, but their tools don't make room for that conversation. So often the culture of design clashes with the culture of business because designers know that there's more to it than that, and that there are other issues that should maybe not take precedent, but also be included in decision making other than just it's too expensive or can you add these 3 more features. And business people, for the most part, kind of ignore things they don't understand and ignore things that can't be easily quantified. So what ends up happening, though, is the business people kind of know that there's something there. They just aren't comfortable understanding or defining it. And so the economists in the business world will do stuff like this. Lifetime customer value. They know that there's more than just the price the customer's paying right now, and what they're getting for that price. But this is how they approach it because they're fundamentally quantitative. In fact, a lot of people in business are quantitative optimizers, which are great. You want quantitative optimizers in your company, especially a big company. But when quantitative optimizers make leadership decisions, you get a lot of funky things that end up looking like this. You don't have to take a picture of this. It's not real. I mean, it is, but it's not right. You'll never have to do that kind of math because it's just scratching the surface of if you really cared about lifetime customer value, this is just a pale ability to measure it. In the brand world, you've got sort of 7 standard functions and equations to calculate brand. Again, business people know that brand is worth something, but they don't know how to calculate that something. And because they can't come to an exact replicable number, they just don't really trust it at all. And then there's a bunch of business people still diehard leftovers that, brand is, bullshit. So we have a weird situation here where even the people who know that something else is out there aren't able to sort of honor it or include it in decision making or prioritize it just because they can't come to a number for it. I'm here to tell you, this is what we teach our students, there's 5 kinds of value. Functional value and financial value, which we're all very well familiar with, are great, but there's also emotional value, identity value, and meaningful value. And in fact, those 3 forms of value, although they're nearly impossible to measure, are not impossible to work with, to design, to build, even to manage, if you believe that they're there and if you care about the value. In fact, that value is usually in a position to overpower or overvalue the financial and the functional value. The other thing is that these value, in fact, any value, only exists in the concept in the context of a relationship. There's no relationship, there's no value exchanging hands. So value is bidirectional. People don't just give you money for the hell of it. They give you money because they're getting something back. That might be features, it might be meaning, it might be emotions, and that's always dynamic, and we can't forget that. Most business tools are not terribly dynamic, unfortunately. So the value is bidirectional, it's dynamic, and it only happens in the context of a relationship. And a lot of business people have trouble with this because it seems touchy-feely, but the reality is if there's no relationship, how could value ever exchange except between, banking system 1 and fax machine 2 or something? So all business really functions as a mechanism of relationships, which means we need to prioritize relationships. If you want more value, you need better relationships. If you want better business, you need better relationships. And then the last piece of this equation is that relationships only happen in the context of experience, period. No experience, no opportunity for relationship, no opportunity for value. to exchange. And it's that simple, and hopefully it seems pretty obvious. But this flies in the face of standard or traditional business dogma, if not opinion. And it really doesn't matter if you're talking about users or citizens or government or B2B or B2C. A lot of people always come up to me and say, oh, all this makes really good sense for B2B or for B2C, but what about B2B? And the reality is, if you're dealing with people as opposed to two machines talking to each other, all of this stuff, it's sort of, there we go. Okay, sorry, I'm not looking behind me. All of this stuff is true. Doesn't matter how you define the two actors within the relationship, it all holds true as long as it's, two humans. And in fact, salespeople, for instance, will be the first people to tell you if they're negotiating on the basis of price, if that's what it's going to come down to, they pretty much lost the sale. Salespeople know that they're negotiating on the basis of emotions and identity and meaning. Same in government and civic innovation, same in NGOs, nonprofits. And this sort of looks like this. These are sort of, think of this as shells of depth of the relationship that you make with people. It's absolutely the same with your friends and family, by the way. You may not pay your friends to be your friends. Some people probably do. But there is value being transferred both ways. It's probably meaningful value, emotional value, might be a lot of functional value. Especially if you have kids that you have to sort of bribe them to babysit, that's a value relationship. So this is true of everything. I'm going to talk about it in a commercial context because a lot of people sort of get weirded out when you talk about personal relationships in this sort of context. So there's two kinds of quantitative value and three kinds of qualitative value. And how many people have ever had someone tell them, well, that's great, but it's too expensive. People aren't going to pay more for it. Go back and redesign it. Anyone ever hear that? Not very many people. Well, Portland must be a really amazing place. That's how most people, most designers and developers and even engineers encounter a lot of what they want to design is usually stunted because some business person says people don't pay more for things. Happens in startups especially, but happens in large companies as well. And I'm here to tell you that's just plain bullshit. If anyone ever says people won't pay more for things, look at the watch they're wearing. Ask them what car they're driving. Look at the clothes that they're wearing. If it's not Kirkland, which we all know comes from Costco, right? Or if it's not, Hyundai or a Kia, even Hyundais and Kias are nice these days, but if it's not the absolute cheapest version, then even they don't believe what they're saying, or at least they don't act along the lines of what they're saying. People always pay more for things, at least for certain categories, for certain kinds of things that are important to them. It happens all the time. If it didn't happen, there would be no such thing as a premium brand. You wouldn't have a Disney, a Nike, an Apple, probably, well, Google doesn't really charge for anything, right? Like, you pay with your data, but you would never have a premium brand. There certainly wouldn't be Porsches and Lamborghinis and Chanels and whatever. People will pay more for things when they get something more back from it. That's how value works. That's how business works. But this is one of those myths that is just absolutely demonstrably untrue that people hold to because they don't know how to deal with that hidden part. So if we're going to be better designers and do better design and offer better things for people, we need to increase our understanding of the equation of value. It's the qualitative and the quantitative together that people assess when they decide to buy things. Now again, not everyone does this for every category. In this town, a lot of people choose to do it for the category of food, and there's some awesome food in this town. Doesn't mean that everyone does, doesn't mean that the person that does it for food isn't going to do it for cars or clothes or houses or something else. In the business world, we have business terms for this. The quantitative value is called book value, meaning what the books say your company is worth. And in accounting, you have a weird little term that attaches to a spreadsheet for a balance sheet called goodwill. And this is business's way, or at least accounting's way, of dealing with that extra value. So when Suddenly you have more money than you thought you did, or someone gave you more money than you expected, and you don't know what to do with it on the books, you shove it into goodwill, because that's the only way to make the balance sheet balance. So if we look at it this way, and premium value, by the way, is a business term to refer to the qualitative side. Business people understand premium value. The whole word premium says something special that people are willing to pay more for. And even the people who say people won't pay more for things will recognize that premium brands get paid more for things. It's just crazy. So business people are used to see, the iceberg metaphor actually works really well, because business people are used to seeing the part that's easy to see above water, and it's very tangible to them. And what they don't see is what's below water, because it's all murky to them and they don't necessarily trust it. And just like an iceberg, what's really important about it is that the bulk of the value is underwater. It's hidden from them. So I'll give you an example. This is from about 3 years ago. Instagram gets purchased by Facebook for $1.1 billion. Everyone gasps that 7 or 12 people or whatever could create so much value in so little time. Nowadays, of course, with Uber and Airbnb and whatnot, it looks like chump change. We know that the total price that Facebook paid was $1.1 billion. Anyone that wasn't in my workshop yesterday want to guess what the books said the company was worth the day before it got bought? Any guesses? You can yell them out, because I can't see your hands. 300,000. All right, you're really on the low end. Great. Anyone else? 250 million. Okay, anything else? I hear 250 million and 300,000 going once. It was $86 million. And that's only because, you're actually, I think, a little bit closer. It's only because investors put 50 million in 5 days before the sale, right? This isn't a company that had a lot of assets. And the books, the accounting system only knows how to count certain kinds of value, like assets. Had a lot of cash on hand, had some computers, had some whatever. Most of the people, like, you can't count the people. All your value walks out every day at the end of the day. $86 million is what the books said the company was worth. But the company was sold for $1.1 billion. I'll save you the math today because it's morning, but that's an extra $1 billion that Facebook just gave to Instagram because they were nice guys, basically. So what is the accounting system? Like, if you're the accountant, what do you do with that $1 billion? Because the day before, it didn't exist. The day after, we got an extra $1 billion. You shove it into goodwill. Oh, nice. It was very nice of them. But so which one of those numbers is bigger? Yeah, the hidden one, right? By quite a margin. That's the power of understanding qualitative or premium value. It's almost always worth more than the book value or what the quantitative value of a company is. Every single investor in the world is trying to build this, by the way. That's why you get investment. That's why you do a startup, et cetera, at least on the for-profit side. But all the tools they're using are focused on the top part of that equation, just the quantitative value. And it's not the biggest part of the equation. That's fundamentally the problem with business, especially in the startup world, but it's just as true in Coca-Cola's case or GM's case as it is for a startup. We're the ones that understand how to create that middle part of value, the premium value. That's the power of design. The problem, of course, is lots of our business peers don't even think that this exists. And where they do, they're not so comfortable with how decisions get made there or prioritizing it because it doesn't feel real to them. And I'm here to tell you it's a hell of a lot of real in this case alone. But lots and lots of companies, in fact, companies that have equity events like when they go public or when they get purchased, this is an incredibly common phenomenon. Maybe not quite to the exponential returns that Instagram's showing, but even when Pixar was purchased by Disney or telcos purchase each other, there's still a huge amount of hidden premium value that occurs. I'm going to give you another example here. Back in 2001, when the iPod went on sale for the first time, first of all, it was kind of panned by the technology press. as never going to be successful. This is what Apple's stock price looked like. So those little green marks are splits, meaning the price would actually hockey puck a little bit more. But if you look at about 2001, pretty flat still. But if you look at right around 2004, 2005, it starts to climb for some reason. Anyone want to venture a guess what was different about 2004, 2005 that changed Apple's stock price? Sorry, you're going to have to be a little louder. So not the iPhone, not yet. iTunes. What about iTunes? Because iTunes came out with the iPod in 2001. The store, yes, the iTunes store. And so what's interesting about Apple's always an exception to everything, but Apple would come out with record quarters every quarter pretty much. And essentially the market said, okay, whatever. And that was the case when the iPad came out. It was the case when all sorts of stuff came out. But in 2003 is when the iTunes Music Store launched. You're absolutely right. And then essentially a year or so after, when they started showing revenue, that's when the market said, oh, you're not a computer company. You're a music company. We have to reevaluate how we value you. And Apple's fortune started to climb. And then, of course, it wasn't just music. It was movies and books and all sorts of stuff. So Apple's got a pretty good business going on here with this iPod thing and iTunes Music Store thing. And that's all great for Apple. But the folks at Apple are pretty smart. And they were looking at a couple other things in the world. And this is what started to occur to them. They saw the rise of mobile phones. And they also knew something else. Apple's a very intuitive company, but they're also a very experientially focused company. And people are really only willing, one of the things they sort of figured out was that people are only willing to carry about 3 things in their pocket. Anyone want to guess those 3 things? Keys, wallet, but this is early. This is 2003, 2004. So it's not really phone. It's keys, wallet, and one other thing. And that other thing back then was just as likely to be a digital camera, a PDA, an iPod, and for a few people, it was a phone. But they saw that increasingly it was going to be a phone. Well, Apple's not dumb. They've got a good business going, and they recognize that they're going to lose the iPod at some point, right? Because everyone's just going to have a phone instead of an iPod, and that means they're going to lose their revenue off of iTunes, and they're going to lose their valuation in the market because the market's going to say, oh, you're not really a music company anymore, you're back to being a computer company. So Apple knows that they need to get into the phone. All of this makes a lot of sense, right? So what does Apple do? What's their next product? No, it's not the iPhone. You guys are all amnesiac. It was this. It was the first phone with iTunes. It was the Motorola Rocker. Came out in 2005. The reason I'm bringing this up as an example is this is all really, really smart decision making, but it was all the wrong decisions for the right reasons. So what Apple did was say, we don't know a damn thing about making phones. We also know phones are really, really hard to do. $1 billion investment minimum. So let's partner with the best phone company in the United States, which was Motorola. It had the Razr. It was the most popular phone, most widely acclaimed phone. And that's what they did. It made a lot of business sense. They didn't know anything about phones. They know they need to get into the phone. Let's partner with people that know phones really well. This was the result. And no one was happy. Maybe Motorola was a little happy, but it didn't sell well. Apple certainly wasn't happy. In fact, they were pretty much embarrassed by it. Then they had to change their strategy. And what they did was decide, fuck, we got to be a phone company now. Okay, how are we going to be the best kind of phone company? How are we going to make the best phones? How are we going to make an Apple type of phone? And then they came out with the iPhone after many years. They spent at least 2 or 3 years developing this. So what I want to impress upon you is that these are business decisions that are being driven by design decisions, being driven by design experiences, right? The understanding that people only want, there was no market research that said 3 is the optimal number of things people will carry in their pockets. This was an experiential insight they had from what it's like to live in the 20th century or 21st century. They applied that to their business objectives and strategy, and it affected their strategy. And when their strategy wasn't correct, as this proved, they changed their strategy. And they decided they needed to do the design part themselves because it wasn't good enough to partner with another company, even though they were the best company in the world at the time. Those companies, and for that matter people, but we'll keep this in a commercial context, those companies who focus on total value are just in a position to create it more often and create more of it. That's all it is. If you're talking to your business peers, use the term premium value, because that'll signal to them that something's important. It's like in the sustainability world, you use the word capital for things. That's not nature, that's ecological capital or natural capital. And then people go, oh, well, that's something important then. But when it's just nature, it's not so important. Or you call things social capital so that business people go, oh, well, I'll pay attention then because it's not just my employees. It's something to be conserved and managed well, which is what capital is. We have to impress upon our peers that everything is a relationship business. Inside a company, outside of a company, with partners, with customers, with employees, et cetera. We're always, always in the relationship business, which means relationships are absolutely strategic. But there's not business tools for building or managing relationships for the most part, at least not outside of the HR department. If that's the case, if relationship is strategic and we know that relationships only happen in the context of experience, experience is incredibly strategic. And that's what we do as designers and developers. We're the primary people responsible for creating great experiences. Can't have great value if you don't have great relationships. Can't have great relationships unless you have great experiences. Bingo. There's your business case for why design is really important to companies. Has anyone ever read The Experience Economy by Pine and Gilmore? Again, I can't see. You have to be verbal. Okay, I'll assume nobody. Well, now you don't have to read it because this is basically the whole book in one slide, which basically says, I mean, there's stories around it, and it's actually a really good book. It was the first book, by the way, that impressed upon business people the value of experience. But it did one little thing wrong, in my opinion, and that is, throughout the book, it basically said, as you move from a commodity business to a product business, to a service business, to an experience business, everything goes up. Your costs go up, but your profit margin goes up, your loyalty goes up, your customer engagement goes up. Everything can go up if you do it right. The problem with this is that that thing on the end can't be experience. The reason for that is that when you're using a product, isn't that an experience? Certainly when you're using a service, we all know that's experience because we call it, customer service. It's a service experience. Experience can't be the thing on the end because it's all experience. And this is the one thing in the book that doesn't make sense. And the problem with this is that it convinced a lot of companies that only certain companies were experience companies. Special companies like Starbucks, and maybe not even Starbucks, but Disneyland. And the sort of proof that the authors used in the book was that if people have to pay or are willing to pay you to get into the experience, then you're an experience company. Starbucks isn't really an experience company because you don't pay to get into the store and then buy the coffee. Well, that's just kind of silly because we all know that Starbucks thrives on its experience. Most places thrive on their experience. Every company is an experience company, period. Just like every company is a relationship company. But if you run into one of your peers, it's like, oh, we're not an experience company, we're a product company, or we're a service company. It's now your job to help them understand that, oh, no, you're an experience company. You just create crappy experiences because your eyes aren't on the prize. But I kid you not, as obvious as this stuff sounds and seems, this is what passes for, at least what passed for innovative business thought in 2001 to 2003 or something like that. We're the ones that understand the dimensions of experience, the elements that play in creating a great experience. And we need to build the room to have the influence to do so within our companies. We also need much better tools. We need better tools to understand the value that we're creating, especially on that premium side, those three kinds of value that just feel squishy and wishy-washy to everyone else, which means we need new ways to collect more data on that, both in research and then in validation. We need tools that help validate the kinds of value that we're actually responsible for creating. Like meaning, and I talked about this a little bit in my workshop. We worked with this. We have a model for meaning. If you want to create meaningful experiences, I can show you how, because we have a model for it. We have new research techniques that allow us to understand meaning, and then we have design techniques that allow us to put that meaning into practice so that it heightens the opportunity for creating more meaningful value, period. These are design tools. The problem is they're not the normal kind of design tools, and they're certainly starting a conversation that, the traditional business person has never had, probably isn't comfortable having, and doesn't really even know how to initiate, let alone respond to. Some of these tools are visual, because it's really difficult to talk to customers or constituents about a lot of these things. You can't just sort of say, oh, so, what's the most meaningful thing to you? Family? We don't know how to have these conversations. And as anyone who's ever done user research or market research for that matter well, you can't ever ask anyone the thing you want to know from them. So I couldn't even if someone could answer the question, what's the most meaningful thing to you, you could never trust the answer. So we need entirely new tools to help us triangulate what's really going on in people's lives. We can't use the same tools that prioritize features or signal price point to get at emotions, values, and meaning, or emotions, identity, and meaning. Those tools are ineffective. And a lot of the new tools that we need to use, like playing games with users, interviewing them in different ways, laddering, which I showed my workshop yesterday, those are tools that are designed to have or stimulate the kind of conversation that we can then learn what's going on in the emotional lives and the meaningful lives of our customers so that we can understand their priorities and then design better for them. And these are called meaning cards, and we use them. We teach our students how to create them and then use them in these kinds of conversations and user research, because that's the only way we've found to get the kind of data necessary to make those better experiences, that make those better relationships, that build that kind of value. And when you're done with this process, you get a lot of really interesting information about how people respond to things, literally their behavioral response, which is part of something called state of mind. When you talk about experience, what you're really talking about is shifting people from one state of mind to another. That's all experience is. It's that shift. And so we need to understand state of mind, and one of those things is, one of the 5 components of state of mind is behavioral response. And we can track behavioral response and say, for these customers who want this kind of experience, these are the things that reinforce it. If they want a community experience, if they want a harmony experience, these are the things that trigger that for them. And I know it sounds very lab ratty, like that dopamine button that the monkeys are trained to, push over and over again. It's really not either that scientific or that deterministic. But these are design tools that help designers make better choices so that it's not just about our favorite typefaces that week or colors or materials or whatever. It's us orchestrating or curating the many, many decisions that we need to make in order to create a great experience with an understanding of what the impact those decisions have on our customers' reactions. Okay, so we need these better tools. A typical journey map is not a bad place to start at all. The problem with the journey map is it focuses on the touch points first. Touch points are most important, and mostly those are tracked in terms of features in a very narrow story. It's very front end, back end. Where's the emotion? Where's the value? Where's the meaning? Where is value tracked? What happens before someone even shows up at the website or launches the app? All this stuff is missing from the typical journey map. In terms of the state of mind, which is really difficult to sort of pin down, and by the way, you don't need to be a cognitive psychologist to do this kind of work. it gets a little bit wishy-washy, to use a term that a lot of people aren't comfortable with. So we need a better design tool that helps us not track touch points, but track experience, track emotions and meaning for the most part. And then by building a narrative around that, and that's exactly what my workshop was yesterday about this new tool called the Waveline, we start with creating a better experience, an emotional narrative, the same way that a story plays out in a TV show or a movie, or a story plays out in a symphony. Then we can figure out where the touch points are, or what kind of touch points are needed to make that experience happen. But if the touch points come first, for the most part, you're just going to design slight variations of what you already got. We have to become like screenwriters and composers that create new kinds of stories, also known as experiences, that then enable or highlight the opportunities to create entirely new touch points, which may be a product, maybe not, maybe a service, maybe not, might just as easily be an event or a space. And when you're done with this, this is a Waveline. This comes from my co-author, Steve Diller's company, Scansion. They do this all day long. They do the qualitative experience for this, for companies. Actually, this one's from a company not so far from here. And this is how they display and explain what they found. So what you're seeing here are three different, the blue, the purple, and the green. Those are three different customer segments within this market. The whole timeline started with getting information, making choices before sales, before setup, before use. Doesn't look super different than let's say a customer journey map, but the information in it is actually radically different. There is some notations about touch points, but for the most part, this is a narrative. This is a story of a user's life with this product playing out, which is highlighting sort of that premium value. What's their emotional and meaningful experience? And then, yes, the touch points are put in there too. And they've done some really interesting things. So that top thick line, that's the ideal experience. So once we've tracked what's actually happening, this is a way of saying this is what really should happen. And so the difference is wherever it's lower than that ideal line, that's an immediate opportunity to focus on creating or redesigning something, whether it's a touch point, whether it's a new kind of thing entirely. Those are the best opportunities to change the experience and therefore change the relationship. It's incredibly obvious when you put this down visually. And it's been incredibly successful. And then the other little thing I want to note here, which is hilarious if you ask me, the little video buttons. It's not unusual, I'm sure all of you have this experience, it's not unusual to present your findings of research and have someone in the room go, oh no, people don't really have that problem, that's not really a big deal. Click, up comes the video from the customer interview where someone says, oh my God, you know what I really hate? This thing is what drives me nuts. There's the evidence, there's the validation. It's become a super successful tool for them to make their point about, no, you don't want to design there because you're actually doing a really good job there. You want to design there where you're really falling down. And often this stimulates a conversation within the company of, well, we don't have any expertise there. Well, duh, that's why you're not doing a very good job. And then go get the expertise. If that's where you're screwing up the relationship, even if you need to go become skilled at something you've never become, you never had skills at, that's still the most important thing you need to do. So it's a tool for changing the conversation around relationships because that's exactly what a Waveline is. These are sort of some of the differences. The big difference here is prioritizing relationship, prioritizing emotions and meaning, and the story around them, and then letting design do its job and engineering and other kinds of development do its job afterwards. But if you just jump to assumptions about the new touch point or the reconfigured touch point, you lose the opportunity to build a new story in the first place. And I know Leo, who's I think speaking this afternoon, has an opposite approach to this with presumptive design, they're actually not so far off. He's sort of doing a piece out here way in front of that, but at some point you still need to do this if you want to truly create new kinds of value. We can show ways of aligning companies' corporate strategy with their experience strategy, with their value strategy or their relationship strategy. It's actually not very difficult. They're new tools, but they're not, they're not crazy talk. They may sound like that to the truly quantitatively focused, but it's all pretty obvious once you sort of lay it down. And that's our job as designers in this business context, is to lay down these new tools and say, I can build this thing for you. Here's how I can do it. And I can pretty much show and validate that this thing, will create you more value. Now you got to let me do my job. That's the hardest thing for the quantitative folks to do, because it still sounds like crazy talk to them. It still sounds really flaky and unsubstantial. And it's our job to make it sound at least a little bit less flaky and a little bit more substantial. These are, if you go to this URL, some of these tools are sitting there, the templates for the waveline, some of the other pieces. I have to say, we have not been super great about putting our new tools into, publishing, sort of publishing format so that you can use them really well. They are brand new tools. They need to evolve quickly. There's only so much we can do. We need the whole industry to take hold of these and rapidly prototype and iterate them so that they get better faster, because we all need better tools. We need to bridge these two worlds in better ways, and I'm just as guilty. I would never sort of talk like this in front of a client. I'm usually more respectful one-on-one. But I also get really frustrated hearing the same sort of dogmatic bullshit over and over again from people who aren't even listening to what they're saying and don't even agree with what they're saying. It sort of sounds like the election this year. It gets old after a while. One thing you learn as an MBA is that business people are super duper confident about things that they don't realize aren't true. There are a lot of myths of business. I know a lot of you are like, oh my God, finally someone said it. That's what I was thinking all along. There are a lot of myths of business that business people just don't question, because they've been told in business school, and they spend a lot of money to be told these things, that these things are true. They're not. Rich people do not create jobs. It's absolutely demonstrably untrue. If that were true, we would be swimming in jobs right now. It's a really good video. You can see it on YouTube from TED, from Nick. What's his last name? Oh God, he's like a billionaire from Seattle who got up on stage in front of the whole TED audience, and these are not exactly, poor people, and said, I'm here to tell you I'm a billionaire and I don't contribute to the economy in proportion to my wealth, and rich people don't create jobs. And in 6 minutes, he just obliterates that myth. Well, we need TED Talks for each one of these, because they're all untrue. People are not rational actors, and yet that's at the foundation of neoclassical economics. If you ever get into an argument with, first of all, you're not going to win it, because they're just never going to, dogmatic people don't accept things even when there's evidence, but the reality is that no, nobody's a rational actor. Show me one. If someone ever tells you people are rational actors, ask them to introduce you to one, because there are no such things. But that's the dogma, right? Now, to be fair, we have our own dogma that we need to get past as designers. The work does not speak for itself. I'm sorry, I know you didn't get into design to be a public speaker, but you're going to have to speak up. My whole program exists because of a conversation that's never actually happened but is always happening in a boardroom or in a company, where imagine that, this is the boardroom and all the C-level people are there and they're trying to decide on, are we going to do this one or are we going to do this one? Because we can't do both. And so they turn to the designer and say, well, you think we should do A instead of B. Why? Well, we as designers are taught to go like, well, I had this inspiration and I really saw this thing and it moved me, and then I thought that, maybe if I just changed a couple, we don't know how to talk about stuff in business terms. Are you going to really trust that explanation? So the CEO asked the VP of marketing and says, well, you think we should do this one instead of that one. Why? And what does the VP of marketing say? Well, we polled people, and 67% more people said they'd buy this than that. Who are you going to trust, right? It's not that this isn't the right answer. In fact, it very well may be the right answer, but we're so terrible at explaining to people why it's the right answer because we just assume it should be obvious, that very often we kill ourselves and our preferred projects because we're so bad at explaining it. So we have to change our skills up, and we have to change a little bit of our understandings as well. So I'm running out of time. Just got a couple minutes left. That strategic phase is where we don't usually get to play as designers and developers. This is just as true of engineering usually, unless you have a CTO in the company. And that's exactly where we need to get into. It's not the design phase. It's not the second half. We're pretty damn good at that. We have to get into the first half because that's where all the important decisions are made. That's where the Motorola rocker was hatched, right? This is where, how many people have gotten the design brief and look at it and the first thing you think is like, who thinks we should make this? This is not what we should be doing. Well, it's too late now because that was decided over there. And the reality is we probably aren't going to walk into that room, those strategic conversations, and sit down and be, peers and buddy-buddy with people and have our opinion taken seriously. We may have to prepare research or prototypes or ideas that get sent into that room without us and still have to speak our points. Because we know the customer, on these levels especially, but in general, we know the customers better than anyone in that room because we're actually talking to them. They're not. They're often only informed from traditional quantitative market research reports about what the customer is and what the customer wants. And I'm here to tell you that, 95% of market research is utter trash. It should just go right in the trash. Because if it's not looking at the right things, it's doing so in a biased way, or it's drawing the wrong conclusions, or it's just plain being lazy. I see very little quality market research. But that's what's in that room making those decisions. So we have to take the products of what we know in terms of customers and get them in that room so when it comes back to us in product briefs or creative briefs, it's the right thing. To summarize, we need to build new tools, and we need to help these new tools, especially business tools being built. If you've ever heard of the business model canvas, this is an awesome business tool that is changing business. Starting in business schools, but really just changing business because it's literally a designerly approach to making a business model. It's totally changing everything. And design is more than a third of the canvas. That's us there. That's our opportunity to change business models and to change business. In summary, you know this and everything. Everyone's in the relationship business. Everyone's in the experience business. I do want to stress one thing. I talk a little bit disparagingly about the quantitative. Quantitative data is really important if it's the right kind of quantitative research. It's not qual versus quant, even though that's sort of culturally how it feels out there. It's qual and quant. And we can't be afraid of quant data or quant tools either, but we do need to reinforce the qual side because they're just missing in business. Literally, for 70 or 100 years of business, the qual side has been poorly represented, and that's really our job. Last thing I'm going to leave you with is if you want a quick intro to some of this, it doesn't have the wave line or anything in that. You'll have to wait for the book to come out and call Lou about when that might happen. Soon, I'm told. This is a really good book about business and leadership in the 21st century. It's if you don't have to go get an MBA. In fact, if you're getting a traditional MBA, you probably save your money anyway. But this is a really good sort of step up to understanding some of those issues. So with that, I'm almost out of time, and I'm going to thank you. And I'm happy to meet you and take questions for the rest of the day or something. Thank you very much.